Continue in the book of Judges, an unfaithful people with a faithful God. And we are just to the point where we're about completely done with Gideon. It took us a while to talk through the narrative about Gideon, but we're down to the very end. So it was as soon as Gideon was dead that the children of Israel again played the harlot with the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. Thus the children of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hands of their enemies on every side, nor did they show kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, Gideon, in accordance with the good he had done for Israel. And so you hate to keep saying this, but we just repeat it. Rinse and repeat, literally, in the book of Judges. Things went well under Gideon. You remember last week we talked about that at the end of Gideon's life, he set up that ephod, and it became a snare for his house for that, so things didn't go quite well for him. But after he's gone, whatever influence he had, that influence is gone for Israel, and they go right back to the Baals and make Baal their god rather than Jehovah, and that starts the cycle all over again. And we have kind of an interlude, if you will, because we're going to talk about Abimelech, because his narrative is in there right now, and we'll get to that in just a second. And it's not a good narrative either. There's not much good about it at all, in fact. Then Abimelech, notice he's the son of Jerubbaal, one of Gideon's sons, went to Shechem to his mother's brothers and spoke with them and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, "Please speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem. Which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal reign over you, or that one reign over you? Remember that I am your own flesh and blood." So, what's Abimelech doing?
Kill them all.
Oh, he's going to kill them all. Yeah, we know that. What's he trying to set up here?
He's campaigning.
He's campaigning, isn't he? He's running for office, if you will. And you notice that it says, would you rather have all of his sons ruling over you or just one? And so, to me, that implies, and brings a question. The implication is they all thought, well, since our dad judged Israel, we by rights get to judge Israel too. And Abimelech, looking at all that, thinking, and I'm not sure he's thinking it this way, it would be better to have one than 70 because that would be more streamlined, more efficient. You think that was his motivation for this? Probably not. Probably his motivation, I want to be in charge. And so he's going to do whatever he can to get to that point. And I don't know the answer to this question, probably none of us do. Did they have the right to claim that leadership over all of Israel? I don't know. I think it's a good question, but not one we can answer. And whether or not he had the right to do that, I don't know, or whether he was taking that right upon himself. And of course, we know that that's not going to end well for him, nor for Israel, as a result of what he's going to do. But he's campaigning for that office. And his mother's brothers spoke all these words concerning him in the hearing of the men of Shechem. And their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "He is our brother." So they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired stellar, upstanding, honest men. Not what it says, is it? And, you know, there's no sugarcoating in this one, is there? Worthless and reckless men. And they followed him. So, number one, what does this tell us about Abimelech? His character, if you will.
Stop at nothing.
He'll stop at nothing. And number one, 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal, which indicates that he must have been, shall we say, pro-Baal, or acceptance of Baal, or whatever the case may be, that he would take 70 shekels of silver from that temple rather than from God's house, from God's treasury, if you will. Yes?
Here's one thing I don't get. It says there that their heart was inclined to follow him, but then he hired them. What's he hiring them for?
Okay, Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. Why did he hire them? Mercenaries? To kill the other brothers, which is going to happen? So, why hire them, I think is John's question, when the men of Shechem said they were inclined to follow him. That's the question, isn't it? Why did he do that?
They were more like him.
Okay. He hired people more like him, people he could count on to do his bidding. Even when he said, I want you to do this and that, maybe the other men of Shechem would have said, I don't think so. That's not quite right. These men, being worthless and reckless men, yeah, we'll do that. Not a big deal. Mike?
We've got two different groups of people here. The people
Yeah.
who were inclined to follow him were the leaders in Shechem.
Yeah.
The worthless men were the goons that he hired,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily the leaders.
Yeah. Two groups of people we're talking about here. And the men of Shechem said, yeah, we'll follow you. But that may not necessarily have meant they were included in this second group of people that he hired. So he hired the people he knew he needed for the job he was about to do. And again, that just gives us pause to think about what kind of character Abimelech had. Then he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left because he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all of Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was at Shechem. And so Abimelech wasn't looking to be a judge. He was looking to be a king of Israel. Now, they asked Gideon to be king, and what did he say? No. Why? What was the reason he gave? What's that? The Lord is your king. And that was why Gideon refused that. Obviously, Abimelech didn't have that same mindset, and so he decided he was going to be king over Israel. And so when we talk about Saul being the first king over Israel, it's not technically correct, is it, in the sense that Abimelech was king. Saul was the first approved by God to be king over Israel. And of course, you remember the story with Samuel, and he wasn't thrilled about that, but God told him to go ahead and allow it. So he made himself king and set up there at Shechem. And now when they told Jotham, he went and stood on the top of Mount Gerizim and lifted his voice and cried out and said to them. So Jotham is not happy about this. And he goes to Mount Gerizim. What was the significance of Mount Gerizim? You remember? Gerizim and Ebal are usually mentioned together. Mount Gerizim was the mount upon which the blessings were extolled. On Ebal was what? The curses. And so that was the physical representation of what God had told them. There's the good side and there's the bad side. Gerizim represents the good, the faithful, the holy. Ebal represents the other side, if you so choose to live that way. And of course, the city of Shechem's kind of in the saddle there, in the middle of that area. So he went to Gerizim, lifted his voice, and cried out and said to them. And he basically speaks a parable. I think we can call it that. It's a story with a moral outcome. Listen to me, you men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went forth to anoint a king over them. And they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, should I cease giving my oil, with which they honor God and men, and go to sway over trees? Then the tree said to the fig tree, you come and reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, should I cease my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to sway over trees? And then the tree said to the vine, you will come and reign over us. But the vine said to them, should I cease my new wine, which cheers both God and men, and go to sway over trees? And then all the trees said to the bramble, you come and reign over us. And the bramble said to the trees, if in truth you anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. So what was Jotham's message? You picked the wrong leader. In essence, that's what it all is all summed up in. Pam?
I have a question. like that's mentioned in Genesis and in Chronicles and here.
Mm-hmm.
Are we talking about?
No, there's several Abimelechs in the Bible. It was a popular name in Scripture. So yeah, we're talking this Abimelech. There were other Abimelechs after. So yeah, we're not talking about the same man mentioned all the way back there. All right. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Marcia.
This seems to be repeating itself throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
From not just Hitler being started with him, but all the way through our society. Men get power, or mostly, and they lose their morals because they put power above what's right.
Sure, absolutely. It's repeated throughout biblical history. It's repeated throughout world history. You get leaders who maybe had a good reason for wanting to lead, and then the power corrupted them. What is it? Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And so that's the case. Or they wanted that power because they were already corrupt and got it. That's why they chose to campaign for that, like Abimelech did, and get that role because he had an agenda of what he wanted to do, and that agenda, in this case, wasn't a good agenda. Vicki?
Well, I think it's interesting that the tree analogy there, the thorn bush and the bramble, is the worst one of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Come under my shade," but you wouldn't want to go under the shade of the thorn bush. So again, it's the worst choice they could have made.
Sure, absolutely. And that's the whole point of this parable. You've made the worst choice. The other trees said, I have a purpose. I have a reason. I produce. I provide. I am an asset to this community. So why should I quit doing that just to be king over all the other trees? And the obvious answer is that's a good answer. But the bramble, yeah, I can do that. Abimelech said, I can do that. And so he does that, and his first act as king is to murder his brothers. Why did he kill them? Pardon? No competition. Again, what's that? Solidify his power. If, as it said earlier, Abimelech said, should you have all the sons of Jerubbaal rule over you, or just one of the sons? And so whether he was thinking they wanted that job, we're going to take that job, whatever the case may be, we don't know. He decided if he had it, he didn't need that competition because they might just decide they want to be king and do away with him. And so he hires these worthless, reckless men and takes care of that.
Well, in the secular sense, in the practical sense, is that when a new regime comes in, you get rid of the old regime.
Yep.
When I buy a company, take over an operation, I bring my own people. It's just a practical thing.
Yeah. From just a purely secular sense, it's practical what he did. He solidified his power. He made sure that he didn't have the rivals that would have maybe been able to stir people up and cause him grief. And so he just got rid of all of them. And except for Jotham here, who was able to hide and then speak against the people from the Mount Gerizim. And it's interesting, and again, I don't know why it turned out this way. Gerizim was the Mount of blessing. Ebal was the Mount of curse. I wonder why he didn't speak from Mount Ebal. Just one of those weird thoughts I had thinking about this. I don't know the answer, don't know that it's pertinent, but he goes to the Mount of blessing and tells this story and something that they needed to listen to. Ellen?
I think it's a perfect example of a con artist.
Okay.
You know, he knew exactly what he was doing every step of the way, and by words, charisma, whatever it may be, he was able to sway the people, and everything worked perfectly for him up to this point.
Yeah, Ellen calls him a con man, and in a sense, that's what he was. He wanted that job for his own personal reasons, to better himself, to better his cause, to better whatever it is that he wanted to do for and with Israel, and that's not necessarily a good reason to come into power, because if you've got an agenda that's opposite of what should be the agenda for the people, which he obviously did, in that he took money from the temple of Baal, hired worthless and reckless men, that tells us a little bit about him. And he wasn't the right person to be leading Israel, and that's going to show up as we keep going. John?
Kind of going backwards a little bit, but I think about those who were hired to give false testimony on the night Jesus was betrayed.
And imagine the Pharisees going to that length to find people to make statements that were not correct or incorrectly given about raising the temple in 3 days and so on. And so there's always going to be scoundrels and those who will follow bad leaders.
Yeah. So John brings up when Jesus was arrested, they hired people to lie, give false witness, false testimony about him and about the things he had said. And some of it outright lies, some of it twisted the truth enough that it sounded right, wasn't right, but it sounded right. And so the length to which the rulers of the Jews went to get Jesus, again, tells us about their character, doesn't it? They wanted him gone, and they wanted him gone now. And they would have gotten rid of him earlier, except for the fear of the people, or they couldn't get to him, because he was challenging everything that they held dear. And what they held dear was not the law, per se, but their own interpretation, their own practice of the law that did not necessarily have anything to do with what the law originally said or intended. And so, as John said, there's always rascals who are going to get out and do things like this, always has been, always will be, and it all boils down to what the condition of their heart is, and obviously Abimelech's heart was not anywhere near where it should be. All right? Other thoughts, comments? Why did Paul, at the behest of the Holy Spirit, write to Timothy about the qualification of elders? Wasn't it for this very reason? So that the person who takes that job is not an Abimelech, who leads the church in ways that it shouldn't, and would damage the church, harm the church. And so that role of leadership is extremely important in the church, with the role of elders and deacons. And we're told we're to obey those who rule over us. And when we do that, we want to know that the men who are ruling over us have the integrity and best interest of the church and the Lord at heart to do that role. And so here's an example, Old Testament example, that we can apply in the New Testament now about leadership. Leaders need to be people you can count on, people you can depend on, people you can trust. And if they're not, then you're going to get a situation like we have with Abimelech, where bad things are going to happen, because that's just the nature of the beast when there's the wrong kind of leadership in place. All right? Anything else? Now, therefore, if you have acted in truth and sincerity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as he deserves, for my father fought for you, risked his life, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian. And you have risen up against my father's house this day, and killed his 70 sons on one stone, and made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the men of Shechem, because he is your brother. If then you have acted in truth and sincerity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come from Abimelech and devour the sons of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come from them and devour Abimelech. And Jotham ran away and fled, and he went to Beer and dwelt there for the fear of Abimelech, his brother. So, would you say that his first statement there, if you have acted in truth and sincerity, was a little bit tongue-in-cheek? He knows they haven't acted in truth and sincerity. That wasn't his intentions. But he's saying that, okay, if that's the case, if you've acted in truth and sincerity, and the second qualifier of that, you've dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house. Well, we know he didn't do that, because what did he do? Killed all of his sons. So he hadn't dealt well with Jerubbaal, who, Jotham points out, saved you from Midian. And you haven't dealt well with his house. Abimelech hasn't dealt well with his house, and yet you follow him, and he's calling down fire from heaven to destroy Abimelech and to destroy those people who are working with him. So it's a bad situation. There's no other way to say that. And then Jotham flees. Why? He's afraid they're going to get to him too. It's kind of like Elijah when he defeated the prophets of Baal. He ran because there was a fear that Jezebel was going to get to him, and Ahab, and destroy him. So here's another example for us in the modern world. Sometimes when you speak truth, you're going to meet resistance. And that resistance may be in the form of opposition. That resistance may be in the form of you being shunned from something. That resistance might even be in the form of physical attacks on your life, on your well-being, or even death, depending on where you are in the world, for speaking the truth. Yet Jotham spoke the truth. Why? What do you think his motivation was?
He wanted to set them straight.
Okay, he wanted to set them straight. He wanted to point out the error of their ways. This wasn't good for Israel. This is not good for you. It's not good for any of us. Go ahead, Jim.
In verse 18, he says, you did this.
Yeah.
Not necessarily Abimelech, but you did.
Yeah, they were guilty. They were guilty of the same thing because of their support of him. 70 sons of Jerubbaal, their blood is on the hands of all who supported Abimelech in this setting. So it's a terrible thing to think about, the character of him and what he was doing and how much damage that does to Israel, which is going to lead them right back into that cycle of violence against them because they're not following God. And it's, how terrible. Have you ever given out bad advice? Yeah, I have to. And you think you're giving good advice, and then you give that advice, and then it turns out that wasn't really good advice. And so what do you have to do?
Eat crow.
Okay, eat crow, or just stick with it no matter what. Don't you know people who do that? They've given bad advice, they've done the wrong thing, but they're not going to let go of that and repent. They're just going to headlong down that same path because I've chosen the path and I can't quit it. And that's a dangerous thing when we can't stop and say, wait a minute, I made a mistake. I gave you bad advice. I did something wrong. I need to repent of that. I need to change from that. And Abimelech obviously doesn't think he's done anything wrong, so that makes it even worse that he's not having a fit of conscience here. He's laughing all the way to the bank, so to speak. All right? Other thoughts or comments? After Abimelech had reigned over Israel 3 years, God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. And the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the crime done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might be settled, and their blood be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who aided him in the killing of his brothers. And the men of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the top of the mountains, and they robbed all who passed by them along that way, and it was told to Abimelech. So, Jotham called down for fire from heaven. It didn't quite come in that format, but God did something. Wonder why he waited 3 years. Again, we don't know the answer, but what might have been the purpose of that 3-year delay? Bob?
A little time to see what it was that they had bought.
Okay.
A little buyer's remorse.
Yeah. I think, and again, just guessing here because the text doesn't say, that God allowed it to go 3 years for them to fully realize the mistake that they had made and realize how bad it was. And so as a result of that, then maybe they would be willing to change. When the Bible talks about God being long-suffering, it's always in that context, it seems like. In the context of giving people time to repent, to change their mind, to do something different. And when the people repent, what does God always do? He takes them back when they truly repent. And so maybe that's what he was waiting for during those 3 years. And must not have been happening because then God acts. He sends this ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. And what's the old saying? There's no honor among thieves. Maybe that's what's being reflected here in this particular part of the story. There's an ill will there that God has fostered somehow, and they don't like each other anymore. And the end result of that is Shechem is standing up and saying, we're not doing this anymore for Abimelech. And so they go out to set men in ambush him, and they robbed all who passed by them along that way. Flo?
I think this kind of shows God's patience a little bit in this 3 years, maybe it's 10 years, who knows? Like
Yes, yes. God waits for his appropriate time that he thinks is right, and then it's going to happen. That's something that we know. And it's interesting, notice that it says they set an ambush for him, talking, I'm assuming, about Abimelech. But what do they do to everybody who passes by? They rob them. So, again, we're talking about the men of Shechem who now are against Abimelech, and that ought to be a good thing, but these still aren't good people. We're in power now. We're waiting for Abimelech until he gets here. If you come through our territory, we're going to take everything you have. And so, again, that gives us an idea of how bad things were in Israel, that they would use their power and their hatred of Abimelech and lay that on other people who had probably nothing to do with that at all. All right? Now Gaal, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, the son of Ebed, came with his brothers and went over to Shechem. And the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. So they went out into the fields and gathered grapes from the vineyards and trod them and made merry. And they went into the house of their God and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. Then Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, Who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal? Is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. Why? But why should we serve him? If only this people were under my authority, then I would remove Abimelech. And so he said to Abimelech, Increase your army and come out. So now we have a new player in the game. And this new player is just like the old player, sounds like, because they went into the house of their God, ate, drank, and cursed Abimelech. So they're still, again, assuming this is Baal, maybe some other god, we don't know, but it's not Jehovah God that they're serving. So they've gone in to do that. So the character of these people is pretty much the same as Abimelech. You're getting one tyrant wanting to replace another tyrant so that he can be the tyrant rather than the other guy be the tyrant. And things are not, again, good for Israel. In verse 29, if only people were under my authority, I'd get rid of him. And the implication there is, and y'all would be better off. And the truth of that is probably, they're not going to be any better off. Because, again, trading one bad guy for another bad guy. And nothing's going to be improved as a result of that other than Abimelech's going to be gone and replaced by somebody else. When Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was aroused. And he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, Take note, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to Shechem, and here they are fortifying the city against you. Now therefore get up by night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field. And it shall be as soon as the sun is up in the morning, that you shall rise early and rush upon the city, and when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you may do to them as you find opportunity. So again, all this intrigue, all this stuff's going on behind the scenes. Zebul sneaks out and snitches to Abimelech about what's going on. He was angered by this. And he goes to Abimelech and says, You're going to have to do something about this. Why don't you lie in wait, and when they come out of the city, you take care of it and fix that problem. So Abimelech and all the people who were with him rose by night and lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. When Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance to the city gate, Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from lying in wait. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, Look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains. But Zebul said to him, You see the shadows of the mountains as if they were men. What's Zebul doing there? Remember, he's the one who went out and told Abimelech in the first place. And now he said, Who are all those people up there? Gaal is saying. It's not people. You're just seeing shadows. Giving them more time to do what they're going to do. And so he's aiding and abetting the attack of Abimelech on Gaal. And so you see the shadows of the mountains as if they were men. So Gaal spoke again and said, See, people are coming down from the center of the land, and another company is coming from the diviner's terebinth tree. Then Zebul said to him, Where indeed is your mouth now, with which you said, Who is Abimelech that we should serve him? Are not these the people whom you despise? Go out, if you will, and fight them now. And so again, he's goading them a little bit. He wants to see this happen, and I think that's interesting. Where's your mouth now? You opened your big mouth. Yeah, where is it now? You're answering for the things that you've said and the things that you've proposed and the things that you've done. So now you're going to have to go fight. You're going to have to go out there and fight. So Gaal went out, leading the men of Shechem, and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled from him, and many fell wounded, to the very entrance of the gate. Then Abimelech dwelt at Arumah, and Zebul drove out Gaal and his brothers, so they would not dwell in Shechem. So we ought to be jumping up and down at this victory, shouldn't we? Nah, probably not. Again, one bad guy getting rid of another bad guy. They're still the bad guy, and that's the case of what we're dealing with in this narrative. And so nothing has improved other than it's gone back to everybody being forcibly united under Abimelech. So again, dark chapter in history for the Israelites. Came about on the next day that the people went out into the field, and they told Abimelech. So he took his people, divided them into 3 companies, and lay in wait in the field. And he looked, and there were people coming out of the city, and he rose up against them and attacked them. Then Abimelech and his company that was with him rushed forward and stood at the entrance to the gate of the city. And the other 2 companies rushed upon all who were in the fields and killed them. So Abimelech fought against the city all that day, and he took the city and killed the people who were in it. And he demolished the city and sowed it with salt. Was Abimelech aggravated about everything? Yep. And he killed everybody in the city. He demolished the city. And then why did he sow it with salt? Won't grow anything. He destroyed the crops. So you have to have crops. You have to raise your food. If you can't do that, then you can't have a city. And just to make sure they didn't have a city, he destroyed that too. And so you've got the city destroyed, you've got the land sowed with salt so it can't produce things, and he's in effect said, for the next many years, nobody's going to live here. And it's going to be, again, he didn't say this, but it'll be a reminder to everyone of what I did and what these men did. And you remember that next time you think you want to go up against Abimelech. When all the men of the tower of Shechem had heard that, they entered the stronghold of the temple of the god Berith. And it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. Then Abimelech went up to Mount Salmon, he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bough from the trees, and took it and laid it on his shoulder. And then he said to the people who were with him, "What you have seen me do, make haste and do as I have done." So each of the people likewise cut down his own bough and followed Abimelech, put them against the stronghold, and set the stronghold on fire above them, so that all the people of the tower of Shechem died, about 1,000 men and women. So, this story just doesn't get any better, does it? Nothing improves. It's just death after death after death. And all of this started when they quit honoring Gideon for what he had done, when they went back to worshiping the Baal, and the end result of that was chaos in Israel. And so they're dealing with it. A lot of people died. And remember, these are kinsmen. We're not talking about people fighting some other foreign country. We're talking about people who have connections with Israel. So it's a civil war type thing going on here, when brothers are killing brothers. And that makes it, in my mind, even worse, because it's not like they're defending themselves against the Midianites or the Philistines or the Amalekites or whomever. They're fighting amongst themselves. And that tells us a little bit about the condition of Israel. And we talked about that earlier in some of our discussions, the idea of one of the reasons that Israel had, Ephraim complained to Gideon, "Why didn't you call us to fight?" And there was that tension that was going on in there. And we said that we think the reason that tension was there was because of their worship of Baal, because they were doing wrong. And that created the tension within there because they weren't unified in following God, the God. And as a result of that, that kind of played itself out in all of society. And so, modern world, where does God rank in our modern world, would you say?
Not at the top.
Not at the top. And we look at the world, and is that evident from the things we see going on in the world? Well, of course it is. So, we're talking about leadership, bad leadership versus good leadership. We're talking about which God we serve, or they served, and what the outcome is when you take God out of that top spot. And always, every single time you remove God from the top spot, what happens to the society? It's going to get worse. It's just a given. And so, now, don't we always think that it's the worst in our generation? Worst it's ever been. Well, Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun, so probably it's not the worst it's ever been. It's been worse places before. But since it's in our time, in our culture, we feel it more keenly. We're living through it, and so as a result of that, we think it's awful. And it is awful. But at the same time, that's the condition that the world has been in since after Adam and Eve did that in the garden that they were supposed to. And it's thousands of years we're talking about that have passed, and in those years, we see the effect that sin has had on a society. And sin never elevates and builds up society. It always tears it down, always makes it worse. And we see that today, as my parents saw it in their generation, my grandparents saw it in their generation, and all the way back through history, that sin leads to the ruin and the downfall of society. And it's just, in our day and age, packaged differently than maybe it was 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago, but it's still the same evil. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life. Everything can be summed up in those three things. And that's what the world follows when they don't follow Jehovah God. And sometimes God's people don't even follow Jehovah God, and the end result is the same. And so, we're talking about leadership. That's why within the church it's important that we have good leadership. And here at Pikes Peak, we do. And we're thankful for that. Thankful for the spiritual leaders that we have. Thankful that they are willing to be the spiritual leaders that they are. And so that leadership helps us to be a better church, better people. And being better people, better church, less likely to have issues like they were having here, and the conflicts between brothers and sisters and tribes and kinsmen, and trouble with worshiping Baal. And again, however you want to case it today, and in whatever metaphor you want to use, not following God and whatever we're following, it might as well be Baal. Because if it's not God, it's all the same. It's all wrong, and it's all evil. All right? Thoughts, comments, questions? Then Abimelech went to Thebez, and he encamped against Thebez and took it. But there was a strong tower in the city, and all the men and women, all the people of the city fled there and shut themselves in. Then they went up on top of the tower. So Abimelech came as far as the tower and fought against it, and he drew near the door of the tower to burn it with fire. He's already done that. It worked well for him once. He's going to do it again. But a certain woman dropped an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. And then he called quickly to the young man, his armor-bearer, and said to him, "Draw your sword and kill me, lest men say of me, a woman killed me." So his young man thrust him through, and he died. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed, every man to his place. Now, we kind of laugh at this story. It's got a humorous element to it, doesn't it? It's not humorous because it's an indication of how bad things were within Israel. So what's the upper millstone?
It's the part that rolls on the top.
Okay, the part that rolls on the top. There's an upper and a lower millstone. The bottom one is usually stationary, and the top one grinds on top of that. Now, how big was this one? It was big and heavy, enough to crush his skull, but it could have been a small one, or it could have been a large one. We don't know. But Abimelech thought, I'm just going to burn this tower down like I did the last one. He's probably standing there looking up at him. And the woman gets this brilliant idea, I'll fix you, and drops it on his head. And that's the end of it. And the last thing he's thinking about with a crushed skull is what? Don't want to be killed by a woman. And, I don't want to be killed. I don't care if it's by a woman or a man or a bear or what. I don't want to be killed. But that was kind of the last thought that he wanted to be remembered by. Not the fact that his skull was crushed by a millstone, but he died because a servant killed him. And how's that any better than a woman killing? I don't know the whole story behind that and what that means, but I find it a little humorous that was his final thought in this life. I just don't want to be killed by a woman. And again, shows us how far perhaps he was away from where he should have been in God in that relationship. Thus God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, which he had done to his father, and killed his 70 brothers. And all the evil of the men of Shechem God returned to their own heads, and on them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jeremiah. And you thought I couldn't cover a whole chapter in class. Look at what we did. All right, we're out of time this morning. We'll pick up there, Lord willing, next week. And we may not get a whole chapter done next week. I'll make no promises.